Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode. Hey friends, thank you so much for joining us today for the Kingdoms Podcast. Matt and I are thrilled to be with today, all the way from Minnesota, but originally all the way from the United Kingdom, Joe Saxton. Joe, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you.
Joe, we're really looking forward to the chance to hear from you, to learn from you. We were talking before we started the recording and saying that, you know, your speaking and writing has impacted us in some rich ways, inspiring for sure, but also challenged us to think and live in new ways. So really grateful to learn from what you have to say today. And there may be one or two people that are tuning in that are thinking like, Joe sounds awesome already, which she is, but we don't know a ton about who she is or what she's done. We haven't had the chance to be exposed to her work and her ministry. And so one of the things that I love about your story is, you know, you grew up in the UK, your journey's taken you from Europe to the United States, where now you're serving as a church leader, as a speaker, as a writer, based out of Minnesota. So could you give us a snapshot of how you discovered, one, not only a personal relationship with Christ, but how he led you from Europe to North America and into everything you're doing now?
Oh gosh. Okay. I'll try and do a shorter version. You know, in terms of coming to know Jesus, I was 9 years old. It was at my primary school, elementary school. And a friend of mine, I think I was the class bully at the time. It kind of, I don't know if you, back in the day, it was on rotation on who was the bully of the month, really.
Fair enough.
It was spring, it was me. And I don't know whether one of the kids thought that they needed a divine intervention, but they did invite me to church. And they said, you know, this church had these weekday, it was a Methodist church, had these weekday gatherings for teenagers, but also for children and teenagers as well. And including a Bible study for kids as well, that you could join and be part of. And I was just really intrigued. I was really intrigued when I went there and everyone was talking about Jesus and how amazing he was. And I did believe in God. I'm from a very spiritual family, lots of faiths represented. So I did believe God existed, and I understood the idea of taking faith seriously. But I didn't know what that meant personally. I knew it in as much as my 9-year-old mind could comprehend. I knew it theoretically. I didn't know personally. And I knew the distinction. I knew there was a distinction. So I was really annoyed that everybody had this friend that I didn't have. So I remember telling, maybe a month or so in, and I would ask questions of the church leaders, like voracious. Just, so tell me this, and what does this mean? And why is this important? Why does that matter? And then I remember saying to them, and I almost cringe, but it's just, you know, it is what it is. I said to them, you know, what you need to do is host one of those evenings where you explain the gospel and get people to become a Christian. If you do that, if you're going to do one of those, I'm going to bring a friend and we'll become Christians that night.
Wow.
And so I just said, that's what you need to do. And they did, and I did. That was it. That was it. It was ridiculous. It was just ridiculous. So, and I think you know, the UK, like I suspect Canada, is in many ways often described as a post-Christian culture and all of that kind of stuff. It's the church, not the center, and which I actually don't mind. Actually, I must confess, but I remember really being captured by a vision of the difference the gospel would make in somebody's life, and the difference it would make in society, and how it would change people's very existence at a societal level. Yes, at an individual level, at a societal level. And even as a teenager, I was stirred by that. That is the thing that made the most sense to me. Now, like many teenagers, I had a roller coaster ride with my faith, but that part, I think, kept on compelling me.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in environments where I saw what humanity could do to each other. Do you know what I mean? I knew how terrible that could be. I grew up in the inner city. We lived in housing that no human being should have lived in. Do you know what I mean? Nobody should have lived in places like that. in terms of its quality, let alone anything else. And I thought, well, this is what humanity's done in its wisdom. It's come up with places where we're treated kind of like rats, and just down the street someone else is living in luxury. That doesn't make sense to me, but I can see that God offers something different, and Jesus has a vision for a different kind of world. And so I was really compelled by that. And I think it would have been in my early 20s where I felt drawn. I wanted to be a journalist, if I remember rightly. I waned to, or a lot. I mean, there were many career choices, including Wonder Woman and disco dancing. But by the time,
strong options.
by the time I got to adulthood, I wanted to be a journalist. And again, just felt really compelled by the gospel and the change that Jesus made, and I couldn't avoid it. I would love to say I felt called into ministry, but that sounds like a real polite version of what happened. Do you know what I mean? I just felt utterly compelled by it, and so went to Bible college, I studied theology at university after Bible college, ended up working for a church, became a youth pastor for a while. I wasn't very good at that. Became a college pastor for a while, like university age, and I was good at that. And I think it just began to unfold. It just began to unfold in terms of speaking and all these other things, and working in other countries and serving in those, even serving alongside all events and organizations to train up leaders. And ended up moving to the States because our church did a kind of church swap. Our church had a lot of young adults, and there was this church which had a more attractional model that wanted to transition the church towards with a greater lens on discipleship and mission in the local community. So they invited a team of us over, including the pastor of our church at the time, to come and work with them. And it was a great idea. It was terrible. I mean, it was really hard. It was really there's no romance there. It was just tough. It was tough because I think it was that sense of there are the things that you both want and feel and see, and completely different ways. There was so much I didn't understand about America at the time. So much I didn't understand about the difference between a context where the church has had a central role or voice and all of that versus one which doesn't anymore. Do you know what I mean? And doesn't care. Yes. And the way you'd engage certain things, I felt like I was walking on landmines for the first couple of years, just out of pure ignorance, not intending. Do you know what I mean? And that, but yeah. So we worked. And by that time I was married. We worked at different churches in the States. But I think I've always felt compelled to be coming alongside Christians wherever they're placed, church, society, wherever, to reimagine what God could do in their lives and through their lives if as the kingdom of God came. That it wasn't limited to a building, that it wasn't limited to a nation, it certainly wasn't limited to a political party. Yes. On the contrary, but do you know what I mean? But that it was him making all things new and him ruling and reigning in different spaces. And so I think even the church stuff wasn't going to last forever either, because I just wanted to keep on coming alongside leaders and that. So I think that's the journey in the end. And probably in the last 6-7 years, I was just really struck by the gap for women leaders. Just the huge opportunity gap. I don't want to say achievement gap because it's opportunity gap, an empowerment gap, an equipping gap, and how we were living with the consequences of that. And to wanting to reimagine ways of empowering, what's the quote? Women make up half the sky, empowering half the sky to play their part in the Great Commission. So yeah.
Wow.
That's great.
That's a great, through so many significant things. Really appreciate your honesty though, about both the beautiful and the messy moments, and how that's led you to where you are now, because it's the 5-minute snapshot of a journey that has encapsulated so many relationships and experiences. So thanks for giving us a window into that.
Now, when you speak of your early days of faith and seeing how the gospel might be able to transform society and communities, and then really giving yourself to that in ministry, I wonder if we can just reflect for a moment. Following England's loss, the Euros this year,
Heartbreak.
Multiple English soccer players of African descent experienced a lot of racist hate directed towards them online. As a woman of Nigerian descent who grew up in London, England, can you speak to the ongoing need of that sort of reimagination and gospel transformation that might happen in those communities? confronting and overcoming racism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a surprise. I remember thinking when I watched it, I mean, on one level, I wish I was sad because England had done so well. Do you know what I mean? It's the story has we haven't been in a final for 50 years, and that was wonderful enough. And then I thought, oh God, anything but penalties. The prayer is always anything but penalties. And then you're like, okay, it's penalties. And I looked and I remember seeing when Marcus Rashford's goal didn't go in, and I just thought, and I turned to my husband and said, it begins now. It begins now, because we both knew what it would mean that in that moment. And when I saw Sancho, and I thought, I was real. And when what's his name? Oh, I always forget.
Saka.
Yeah, when Saka's there, and I looked and thought, oh Lord, he's so young, and it begins now.
Yeah.
And when I say it begins now, I know for a fact that it's not any of their first experience of racism. I just mean the level of vitriol. I mean, I wasn't shocked. And I thought, here we go again. And I think, again, it reminds me, that when Jesus talks about his people, he talks about them being salt and light, and salt is meant to bring a different flavor. Yeah. And it stops things from rotting. Light is meant to illuminate and expose darkness. And I think it's an area where the church has been really poor at. I do, where dominant cultures have been really poor at being salt and light when it comes to race. In terms of what does it look like to be a different flavor? Yes. What does it look like and to the degree that it impacts society? Because actually racism impacts society. It determines jobs, it determines pay, it determines power and opportunities and educational opportunities. And that's the places where we want the gospel to go forth. So, and you can't heal what you don't name. I mean, if you're not going to address, how can we expect to do better if we're not even prepared, if we call it divisive to even mention it? And when actually what is divisive is actual racism. Do you know? Right. Not highlighting it. Highlighting it is just highlighting it. Actually doing it. And I think we have reduced. I think the thing that I've often struggled, because I've been in white majority church spaces for most of my life, and I think the thing I've felt challenged by and have often confronted is it's seen as silly. Racism is seen as silly, stupid people, shallow people, often assigned to the poor, which I find particularly offensive, but ignore them, or almost like it's a distraction, like it's because these people are distracted and jealous. And I'm like, no, it's dehumanizing. It's an affront to people. It's a very affront to even the creation narrative of being made in the image of God. And when you dehumanize people with, history shows us again and again, when you start with words, you end with violence. Whether and we look at the big history, the global history stories of when people are dehumanized, people become more and more comfortable with what happens to a people group when they are othered and then seen pejoratively. And then when the response to it is minimal, oh, just ignore them, and doesn't say it as a collective problem or a collective issue. And then when the church does the same, I guess for me, my question again is, where is the salt? Where is the light? And why aren't you changing society? Yeah. If the gospel is as powerful as we say it is, and I believe it, I know it is, and we know it is, then it changes this. And I don't just mean the human heart. I mean the structural power plays that unfold every time racism rears its ugly head.
Well said.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those things that you ought to see in the church as we, again, like reimagine what a society is, in as much as we're formed by our culture and we're formed by our history, and we inherit that. That's ultimately something that needs to be confronted and transformed in the church. And then, like you say, it should certainly have wider influence in our world as it takes hold in our church, if we do have that salt and light influence in our world.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fundamentally theological thing that and it's and I think for us as believers, it should make us, my opinion is, if we are salt, if we are light, if we are representing the King of Kings and we're wanting to see his rule and reign, then silence isn't an option, or passivity isn't an option, or the racial prejudice and bias in our own hearts isn't an option. And the othering of people who we're not familiar with, and there needs to, I would say there's a twofold thing, that on a personal level, for all of us, there is a search me, oh God, and know my heart about all kinds of anybody who makes us feel uncomfortable, and actually didn't make us feel uncomfortable, but their very presence ignited something within us, which was actually our deal. And so I think for those of us who are like, who are, I'm not sure kind of thing, there is a search me, oh God, and know my heart, test me and know my anxious thoughts. But I think there is for us as churches, as organizations, as, if you are in a neighborhood which is diverse and that's not reflected in your church, why? I mean, there's nothing wrong with the basic curiosity even. The basic curiosity as people on a mission from God. If there is the data of our cities will always tell us the disparities. So if people of certain ethnicities are getting paid less, getting less opportunity, why? And that's not a blame thing. That's a curiosity thing to say, well, and we know the kingdom of God is as an upside down kingdom. So how do we get involved with the turning of the tables where necessary? And seeing God make all things new.
Yeah,
that's so helpful, just to think of, not that there should not be blame. We should definitely confront things that are like morally culpable evils, but to think of openness and to say, if there are disparities, what might be the barriers? Let's be open to confronting those things and looking into them. I think that's a really helpful way. So thank you for that.
It's like the gift, the curiosity is in confronting and renewing. It's good. Joe, we touched on this earlier when we heard that snapshot of your story, but all the time, Matt and I are in conversations with people who are asking big questions about calling, about purpose, about who they are and what God has made them to do. And so would love to ask, when you, especially through young adulthood, but even right through life into the season you're in now, what did it really look like for you to discern God's calling on your life, what He'd made you to do? And then to actively step into that potential.
Gosh, when I saw this question, it made me laugh because I thought, oh yeah, what did happen? What did happen? How did I get here? I think I often say I was the last person to work out I was a leader. And largely because of confidence, largely because of not being sure if I saw many people who looked like me. We're an immigrant family in London at a time when the particular country I'm from wasn't popular. So so it wasn't cool to be us. And such a joy that people let us know that on a regular basis. So so I think it might have been initially my teachers who would highlight things and just say, you're good at that. And it was I think sometimes a call is uncovered. Do you know what I mean? It's uncovered through the things that you go through, and because life gets in the way, stuff gets in the way, cultural expectations get in the way, and God's like peeling everything off, and that's through all the circumstances and relationships, and you don't always know when you're in it. That's what's happening. A lot of it was people, like someone asked me to do something, and I said yes, and then said yes again. And then realized afterwards, like sometimes it was seeing the impact of something. I remember when I first started speaking, and I didn't want to speak in public because I didn't want to be seen, and thinking this is a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. And my youth pastor got me to do a reading or something, and I physically shook because I was terrified and so uncomfortable. I was literally ill, and thinking, if this is a calling, I'm really not interested. I think we've got to find another calling. You know what I mean? And so I needed to, I think part of uncovering calling is not even necessarily always how you feel about it. Not that if you're going to be sick on something for 20 years, I mean, I would say choose something else, but I think there were just so many things being uncovered along the way. The encouragement of others played a massive role. Because when the insecurity and the vulnerability means that you're telling yourself a narrative of you're not good enough, who do you think you are? You've got no right to be there? Who do you think you are for having those kind of dreams? You need somebody's voice to interject and disrupt that pattern of thinking.
Yes,
and that's been a huge part of calling, particularly in my young adult years. I think the other thing that helped me discern the calling was being given opportunities. Like safe spaces where you could try and fail and try again. I don't think calling happens in a vacuum. Do you know what I mean? It happens in a context. And I sometimes say to people, like, you know, sometimes we treat it a bit like American Idol, where you're waiting to be picked. I'm like, this isn't it's not a voice competition.
Yeah.
You know, that's not how this works. Waiting to be discovered or waiting to be affirmed. And I understand how we get there, because I think if it feels risky, you want someone to choose you because it makes it feel like it's right. It's just not reality TV, friends. So some of it was trying things and exploring and testing. You know, you test when you do an experiment with something, you test it, and the results are not about success or fail, because on one level, because, or at least they're not personal, they're just results. They help you work out. You're like, oh, that didn't work. That did work, rather than, oh, that didn't work. I'm a terrible person and I'm evil. No, it's an experiment. You're just uncovering. So I think a lot of that was discerning. That was what my discernment journey looked like: praying about stuff, talking to God, but talking with people I trusted.
Yeah.
Trying things with people I trusted, trusting their encouragement when I didn't have the courage to do something myself, stepping into opportunities and feeling really vulnerable in it. Sometimes it just felt right. And I can't, at a gut level, it felt right, even though it didn't make sense. And you know, to be honest, I think in some ways I'm grateful that it was a time when social media didn't exist, because I think it was easier. I think it was easy. I mean, it wasn't easy, but it was easier. That would have distracted the heck out of me. All of that would have, for sure. And then I think, like, then when you've tried enough things, you can look back and say, so how did it go? And think, okay, that was great for a while. Not sure that's happening anymore. Oh, there seems to be, there are threads. When I look back, I see threads of, I've always cared about access and opportunity, but then my whole story is in many ways about access and opportunity. You know, from my teen years, we didn't have those things. And I know that's what you need to be able to thrive. I look back and think I was probably quite clueless in terms of, I was the captain of all the sports teams at school. Always. I was always, like, when there was some class responsibility, it was always me. I was always leading at school. But I didn't feel like one. And so then I had to add to my discernment place, your feelings need to have a context here. Do you know what I mean? Not to say your feelings are irrelevant. They're really important, but you need to understand why they don't match with what they're actually clouding your vision. Because such is your brokenness, such is your insecurity, that they're telling you, they're telling you you're called to hide. you're called to not be seen, and all these kind of things. And that, so I had to actually discern all the dissenting voices as well, to work out where they were from and what they were doing, and then get some healing in those areas. Because as I became more whole, it was like I could see more clearly. The byproduct of getting whole was vision. And because it's not that I got given a vision, it was almost like the fog began to clear. And
I love that.
You know what I mean? It just became more evident. So that was a huge part. And then I think as your confidence grows, you take bigger risks and bigger tries of things. And when you've done something and you're like, okay, God, that seemed to do something, that seemed to be effective, that seemed to be fruitful, I seem to come alive in that, it seems to make sense of the gifts that you've given me, the need that's there, and the kind of sense of your presence in this moment. Okay, I'll try it again. I've learned to hold things lightly. I think it was because I grew up a Methodist. There's this Methodist covenant prayer that you'd pray every year, and it begins something like, I'm no longer my own but yours. Put me to what you will, rank me with whom you will, let me have all things, let me have nothing, let me be employed for you or laid aside for you, brought high for you or brought low for you, put me to doing, put me to suffering, and basically the whole point is, whatever it is, I'm yours. Do you know what I mean? And so there was almost, the primary call was to him, and he got to deploy where and how, in any job, in any chapter, in any season. And I think that has stood me in good stead over the years, to say, okay, does my call to you look like me doing a particular thing, or being with a particular people, being a particular place? Does it matter? And it's not like I learned to like my calling. I think as I got freer, I was happier. I was happier. Yeah.
That's beautiful. There's so many aspects there, like going from sort of this uncovering, whether it's your own passion, which you talked about, right? Sort of the access and opportunity, people speaking into your life, and God kind of using even just like circumstance to look back at and say, look at how you have succeeded in bringing my kingdom. And it all just comes from that posture, right? That posture of openness. And like you said, like you need to be a whole person who's experienced Christ and his healing to be able to open ourselves up to whatever possibility God has for us. So that's so helpful. But I would say, like, many people I work with, and even in my own walk, often I'll find that I've been like neglecting a calling that God has given to me, or neglecting a burden or a passion that God has given to me, that God has placed on my heart. And that's what you said really like spurred you on. You know, you care about giving opportunity and access. Recognizing that, though, that sometimes we can sort of like leave those things behind. You've asked the question, what is the cost to the kingdom of all these dreams that are dying in people's minds, that are guiltily hid away and never unwrapped? So how can people recognize what God is calling them to do and then actually like take action to realize that calling?
I think there are a couple of things we can do. I think one is, it is worth identifying the fear. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's the fear? So I think in my 20s, it was all my friends were getting married and I wasn't. And I'm like, this is not working for me, friends. Do you know what I mean? This is not working, God. This is a sabbatical I did not ask for, I did not sign up for, and yet here I am. And I think I was still reckoning and working out what is okay for me as a woman to do and be in leadership. I'm like, I didn't ask for these gifts, and yet here I am. So was it an accident? Was it the game plan? I mean, what do we do with this? You know, I didn't make myself gifted in these ways. So I think it's worth identifying the fear. For others, it might be the financial, or it might be the training, and again, my context was ministry. It could be accountancy, it could be wherever the Lord's sending you. That I think there is a reckoning of what are we afraid of, or what makes us nervous, or what does it cost us. That is important to consider. I think ways in which you can move towards it. Clarity does come in community. So if you've got trusted people who can help you process it, and try things out with, or begin a journey. I mean, I think discernment is not. I would love it. I would love it if discernment was a one-time thing rather than a journey.
Amen to that.
I wish it was like a bingo card, and it's like, oh, just a kind of a few quick, not even multiple choice, just I've got a question, God, you've got an answer, make it clear, let's go. I would love that, but that's not the reality. So I think when you are stepping into stuff, I think you do actually have to do something practically. I've heard a lot of people say, I'm just going to wait, which is another way of saying, a spiritual way of saying, I'm just going to check out of this. Or or if God opens the door, I'm like, dude, you open the door. Do you know what I mean? The door's there. Don't keep on spiritualizing. Just walk through. Do you know what I mean? Or I'm not going to ask. And I think we do have to get curious with our calling as well, in terms of pushing doors and exploring and asking questions. And you want food. You don't. I mean, you may, unless you've got an app on your phone which gets some organization to drop food off, you're going to be doing something. And even then, you've still got to go to the door and open it to get the food. At the very minimum, you've still got to open the door. And we super spiritualize, and I think probably because the stakes feel high, we super spiritualize it and check out of all the tools that would help us step into our calling, which are trying things, praying with people, asking people to help you, asking people if they know anybody, asking people if there's any way, or doing some research, letting Google be your friend and finding out the information that you need about the thing that you feel called to. If it's in a church context or wherever it is, finding out where similar things that you're drawn by are happening in your community and neighborhood and getting involved in those. We miss out on all of those things if we're just waiting for something to drop into our lap. And so I think part of the discernment thing is action. If it's the wounds that get in the way, it's actions on the wounds. And I'm not saying, was I still dealing with insecurity years later? Yeah, totally. So I'm not even saying that dealing with the wounds as a one-time thing, but at least have that journey in check and then begin to get curious with the other one. If that's the thing getting in the way. If that's not the thing getting in the way, if it's kind of like, oh, it's too much effort. Yeah, it is effort. Get on. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know how to make hard work easy for you. It just, who was it? Was it someone? I can't remember who it was, but whoever it is, I normally misquote, so I won't quote them now. But it said the opportunity is often Like people often miss opportunities because it's disguised in overalls, kind of thing, and hard work. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of
Yes.
thing of,
Yes.
like, surely if I'm called to this, I should be good at this straight away. Why?
Right.
Were you good at riding a bike straight away, or you probably thought you were, but actually you were riding in circles, and that's no way to live your life. Do you know what I mean? Were you really good at that? And I think sometimes we feel like we've got to be, that calling is the same as being an expert, and it's not. You develop competency along the way. You develop, and I think because we're afraid to learn, or we feel like learning feels like a failure in some way, we hold back, or we don't know how. You know, I know a number of us get into a spot where like, I don't know how this is going to happen, and we put a full stop there rather than a comma, and we're like, you know what I mean? We're like, I don't know how it's going to happen. So sorry, God, I know you called me, but peace out. We're done. I'm not skilled at that. Rather than a comma saying, I don't know how this is going to happen, but God, where do I go? Where do I go with this?
Yeah.
You know, I didn't see this coming, but how can we explore this together? Because again, you know, God, this is a relationship with a heavenly Father. This isn't a kind of taskmaster watching us with grades on whether we fail.
Yeah. It's incredible, like how afraid we are of failure and difficulty, in that like God might be calling us to do the most meaningful thing that we can do with our lives, and it might be that it's not very effective. I think of like Isaiah. That's a lightning bolt call. He does discern once that that's what he's supposed to do, but God tells him straight up, like your entire ministry is going to be one of failure, but it's the most meaningful thing that he can do with his life.
Wow. It reframes it, doesn't it? Because it's like, actually, our faith, if we are obedient to the best of our capacity to what God has invited us to do, did we fail? Like how do we, you know, and when we're serving in the kingdom of God, do we even have to reframe our understanding of failure and success?
Yes.
And
100%.
faithfulness is success, and obedience is success, and faithfulness for as long as we're called, not for as long as we want, but as long as we're called to something, is a success. And because, you know, we look at the end of Jesus's life, and Jesus did not lead a mega church. And I'm not making a comment on mega churches. I'm making a comment on size and numbers being often the thing that we use as a sign of successful. I'm like, I don't know whether Jesus's ministry would fit your metrics. I'm not sure whether Paul's ministry would fit your metrics, whether the early church would fit our metrics. But I'd have a problem with calling them failures, though.
Yeah. True say. Yeah, exactly. Goodness. Well, thank you for those insights, Joe. And to kind of evolve in that train of thought in terms of someone saying, okay, I really feel called to this, the challenge to actually take action, to jump in. You know, there's listeners who are at that place of saying, hey, I've jumped in. I've stepped into what I think I've been made to do. I'm going at it every day. But it's been rough. And sometimes the needs of the people around me or those I'm serving, it can feel overwhelming. And I know you've used the phrase, you know, before you lead others, you need to lead yourself. And so you look back on, you know, 2020 and what we've experienced now through 2021. We've already talked about confronting racism that's emerged. We've journeyed through a pandemic as a globe. There's financial instability. Yeah. What does it look like, or how would you encourage people to stop and say, hey, this is how you can lead yourself before you lead others?
I think there are a couple of things that are really worth doing. I remember when I'm laughing at myself here, when the pandemic began, well, not began, but became aware of it here in the US. I remember sitting down and thinking, okay, God, I'm going to have a really good, important prayer time with you to find out how to focus and to be well during this thing. And I sat down in this seat and I had my Bible and a notebook and some pretty pens, because I feel like pretty pens are essential for discernment. And I had like a cup of tea and everything. And then I sat and I took a deep breath. And then I just said, Lord, do you mind if I get in the fetal position, please? Because I just realized I caved in. All the plans we had, the book had just come out. There was a tour lined up. Everything was gone in an instant. Everything, and they were plans we prayed over, invested in, fasted over, getting ready to go, and everything was gone. And there was no neat, tidy answer. It was just lost.
Wow.
And so I think one of the things I had to recognize was I get to grieve too.
Yes. I
get to grieve and mourn the losses. I get to acknowledge it's hard. I can't do this stoicism stuff just to make it look good for other people, because it's a falsehood. I I need to make sure I'm being raw and honest with God. And so that was one of the first ways of self-leadership. The second thing I had to pay attention to were, what are my vices and how are they likely to flare up at this time? Under pressure. Do you know what I mean? I had to be real honest with them. I had to be really, really honest. So for example, I don't drink very often, partly because I did a lot of that when I was younger. And so now, rarely, like Christmas, a birthday. I mean, to the point when I'm at the doctor's and they ask if you drink, and I'm like, oh, I did, but when was it? And I'll be like, it was March. And they're like, why did you even tell us? We didn't need to know. And do you know what I mean? It's like, stop talking. But I noticed at the beginning of the pandemic, I would every week, and it would just be a glass of wine here and a glass of wine there. And I know that, you know, for some faith contexts, they're like, why were you drinking those? I get it. But I noticed, and I thought, you know, on one level, it wasn't much, but it was for me.
Yeah.
It was for me. It was an indicator of something for me. And I'm like, okay, right now, that vice is very far away, but it started moving.
Right.
Started moving. And it didn't move very far, but it moved far enough to say, alarm. Why now? Of all the times you having a glass of wine, I'm not saying it's bad for other people. I know me, and I know how much I drank as a teenager. I knew I had to stop. Do you know what I mean? I just can't do it. I can't do it. I can't. There's no, I don't need to try. I can't. And I had to be aware of what my vices were. So I think part of, you know, I would encourage all of us as leaders, whether we're new leaders, whether we're veteran leaders, don't wait for someone else to tell your heart to get healed. Because chances are, by the time they've told you, it's because whatever was in your heart has vomited all over your life. And so I needed to say, okay, this is where I'm vulnerable. Do I need a friend? Who do I need to talk to? Who, you know, what do I need therapy at this moment? Do you know what I mean? All of those.
Yes.
But if we're not willing to acknowledge, if out of shame or fear or guilt, which are all understandable, we are busy trying to hold on and be right and be strong, we won't actually get the help we need. Do you know what I mean? You know, there's that bit in Jonah, and where he talks about those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. And I think sometimes the idol of the strong individual leader. I mean, obviously Jonah was speaking to his own context, but whenever I look at that, I just think, oh, what? Sometimes our ideals are actually idols, and I'm like, what was the strong ideal leader I wanted to be did not give me opportunity to access the mercy and grace that is there and present in my time of need, because I was taking care of it. I was being strong. So I think that, so one, you're allowed to grieve. Two, what are the vices and what are you doing with them is really important. And then who are your people? Who are your people to have fun with, to innovate with, to dream with, to mourn with, to have a bad day with? You need those things. You know, we see Jesus vulnerable enough. I was struck by this just today, actually. I was thinking of Jesus as a leader and thinking that he was, you know, raising the dead here, turning tables there, water into wine here, doing all this wild, crazy stuff, and yet weeps in front of his disciples. Do you know what I mean? Weeps in front of them. And I thought, would I weep in front of my team? And not only just weep about, not just, yes, he wept over Jerusalem, but weep about the fact that he was in a really vulnerable space in Gethsemane. And I just thought, oh, so even Jesus did that then. This stuff on vulnerability isn't new. And I just thought, oh, I wonder as a leader where I'm still inclined to hold back on the vulnerability because I just want to have it together. And after a year like we've had, in 18 months, we all want to have it together. But maybe you don't yet. Maybe you don't have it together yet. And part of the self-leadership is actually an honesty about all of those things. So I would encourage us in those spaces in terms of raw honesty before the Lord, raw honesty about where you're really at in your vices, and good people around you for the play, for the rest, but for the pain as well.
That's great. Now, you mentioned when we don't do those things that we tend towards having people approach us all too late after we've sort of vomited all over ourselves. Now, you've experienced a season of burnout yourself, and maybe we can dig into that a little bit and just ask the question: how can listeners both guard against burnout? I think you've probably mentioned a few things already, but if they're in the midst of burnout already, And I suppose many of us are after this past year and a half. How can we pursue recovery?
Yeah. These are hard ones, aren't they? I think in terms of, there are some fundamentals that in many ways are countercultural, particularly, I was going to say for all of us, but churches are particularly naughty on this in terms of, we believe people should take a day off, just not the people in our churches. Do you know, do you know what I mean? And we believe that we're not invincible, except when somebody needs us. And we believe we're invincible, but then we feel we've got to be invincible. And so, I remember hearing years ago, this guy came and spoke to our church when we were all in our 20s, and we were like, feed us your wisdom. Do you know what I mean? It was one of these moments where it's like, we're listening, we're ready to anything you have to say. And he's like, you can't cheat the Sabbath. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Is that it? He said, you can't cheat the Sabbath. And he said, he said, when you cheat the Sabbath for a long period of time, you start acting like you're drunk and you don't even realize it. He goes, you can't cheat it. Just take a day off. And I thought, oh, that was quite blunt and simple. But 25 years on, I remember it because I've watched people cheat it. I've tried to cheat it myself. You need a day. You need to work out what it means to have a day off. And I say work out what it means because I know for some of us, it's like, I don't even know where to start. We'll start with an hour off, then make it half a day, then make it a full day, rearrange the things that you need to do. Who do you need to help you? Do you know what I mean? And don't, who do you need to help you so that you can make this life possible? Because some of us are raising young kids where nothing is off, nothing. And do you know what I mean? Some of us are looking after elderly family members, at different stages. And also, can we say to our businesses, but again, I'm going to say this to the ministry people, single people need days off too. People without kids need days off too. Don't make them you don't need, do you know what I mean? Oh, you don't need a day off. We'll burn out for Jesus. No. That, I think those are things to consider in terms of what we can, a preventative measure. I think that God has given us preventative measures, and work out what it looks like to switch off when you take your day off. So right now I'm trying this for the summer. I think I'm going to keep it. My work emails aren't on my phone. And so, because I would just look at them all the time, I'd be like, just one more minute, and before you know it, then writing some flaming email to somebody or something. Like, you can just get off my phone. You can just get off. You don't need to be there, because my phone is for Spotify, music, and silly apps and fun. It is not for working. It can. That's not what I need. So there are little things of what practical thing can you do to build towards it. Preventing burnout. Now, I've forgotten the second half of that question, and it was a really good second half. What was it?
Yeah, so we've sort of talked about what leads us into burnout, and actually you've kind of brought us to this, but for those who are in burnout, what are some ways that we can work towards recovery? Which Sabbath would certainly be one.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we're in that place, and again, I know I keep on harping on about this, but you can't always see how you got there. You can't always see. And so you might need somebody else to say, yeah, you're not doing that anymore. Like you've committed many, many times. You are overcommitted. You are over functioning now. And you need someone who can tell you about yourself and say, no, you can't do it. You can't do that group. You don't. And because otherwise we will justify our ways back into burnout real quick. We'll explain, well, but this is really important. I'll just do this for a little while. And it's like, or you'll be dead because you'll have died. You know what I mean? And you need people when you can't see, who can see it more clearly than you, and say, and practices like you might need a vacation, and maybe you haven't got the financial resources to go anywhere, and obviously we've been limited, but what does it look like to make everybody think you're on vacation? And I don't mean lie, I just mean say, I'm not here right now, I'm not available. Do you know what I mean? Or put things like out of office, things like taking things off your phone, things, little things that may just give you some margin, because when you are burnt out and you're recovering, you feel awful for a while. You feel awful. And when you're feeling awful, it's real tempting to go back to the thing that makes you feel better, which was the work, because it fed a need and it fed emotion. The problem is it's also killing you. It's also killing you, and it's wrecking your life. And so you need some things. And maybe you just need to schedule going to see a film, and you might just sit in front of In the Heights, and it should be exciting, but you're weeping your way through it and you don't even know why. Fine. Yeah. Just do the thing. But it's very hard to do that by yourself. It's very hard to unburn yourself out. You need to be surrounded with people who will kind of bring you back to life again.
Yeah.
Community is key to this entire conversation. I love it.
Yeah, beautifully really said. Speaking of community, though, and kind of as we approach the end of our conversation together, but wanting to take the opportunity to highlight something from your recent book that came out in 2020, you wrote, Ready to Rise, Own Your Voice, Gather Your Community, and Step into Your Influence. Just this past year that came out. And so, as we talk about community and both the role community can play constructively in being agents of healing in our lives, I'd love for you to maybe speak and give us maybe a 30,000 foot view of this recent work of yours, and really what the heart is behind that, what your hope is for people to take away from that as they step into, well, now this third decade of the 2000s that we're in.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I wrote it because I wrote it with women at the center. It's not that guys can't read it at all, as you guys well know, but I wrote with women at the center because I don't often read leadership books which center some of the women's stories or the nuances of it. And the reason why I did that is because when I was speaking at events and things like that, I'd have these conversations with women during the breaks in the restrooms. And they asked me leadership advice, and I'm like, you know what, your calling is worth way more than 5 minutes in the loo. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, this ain't right. It's not right. And so it was a way where I was like, okay, when I think of what helps someone step into their leadership, what could it be? And that was the overall goal. And there were just things I kept on seeing around the world when I was connecting with women leaders. One, about their voice and wanting to reclaim it, but feeling like imposters. Feeling like fakes, and having, as you mentioned earlier, having these dreams and like this incredible talents and this incredible skill and this like more degrees on the thermometer and this incredible gamut of experience, and then this timidity, almost an apology for things that God caused. I'm like, I mean, like, you're an apologist for what God has placed on your life, and voices that needed to speak into things. But had been intimidated into silence or socially conditioned into settling for something else, or all these other sorts of things. And so that was one of the things. And then the other thing I noticed a lot with women in leadership was the loneliness. You know, if you're going to ask somebody in the restrooms about deep leadership stories, knowing that there's a whole other group, you're lonely. Because there's nowhere else to talk about it. I mean, I'm not just saying like chummy conversations. I mean, really vulnerable, raw stuff. Like, do I leave this profession kind of stuff? Things that were, but because there was nowhere else to go and nowhere else which felt safe. And I thought, well, we need to be proactive in building the kinds of communities where you can ask questions safely, explore things on a practical level, on a professional level, on a personal level. We do better in community, and it helps us face the world, and we're more effective in the world as leaders. And none of this isolated leader business, this kind of like Lone Ranger types. I was like, no one's got time for that. It's a waste of our time and our energy, and it's not what we see modeled either in the kingdom of God. So it's like, well, but we also have agency in that. So it was deliberate to say, gather your community. It's like, okay, come on, okay. Own the voice that God has given you. Say yes to who you are. Say yes to how He's wired you. It's not that you need new gifts, it's that you need to accept the ones you've been given and uncover the ones you've been given. Gather your community. There are people around you that you're not even engaging with, and that person who you thought was a threat is actually an ally. Engage with that. And then the stepping into your influences, we just need to get some things done. And you know, the world will be rebuilt in one way or another. As we come in and out of COVID or whatever, the world will be rebuilt. Who do you want to build it? Whose stories do you want at the table this time? Because not everything we don't want to go back on everything. Some of the things in normal need to stay dead. some of the normals we have no business going back to, and have just exposed the fault lines that have existed in our societies for generations. And if you have a voice and if you've got a call, then you need to be part of rebuilding those places that have been long devastated for generations. You need to rebuild the ancient cities, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a homemaker, whatever your role is, whether you're a singer, creative, but rather than like waiting for to be picked and chosen, step up. And those are the things I was wanting to get to when I wrote the book.
That's fantastic. Now this is maybe like I don't want this to sound too pejorative, but one of these days I'm going to look for a book series on leadership called 5 Minutes in the Loo. I'm excited for that.
That would be fun. That would be fun. The 5 minutes in the Loo. That's so good.
Yeah, so just as we kind of wrap up, as we look into the future, as you're saying, you know, we're coming out of a time of maybe preparation, let's say. As we look to the future, what do you think is essential for the church to pursue and embody in order to see God's kingdom come, you know, in the States or in Canada or even around the world?
Ooh, I mean, I think we need to not just look at what Jesus did, but how he did it, what he said, and his values as well as his actions. Do you know what I mean? To see that, I think to have to note his relationship with power would be a good thing. I think we can do is look at his relationship with power, because it's not always the relationship that we all have with power. And so I think there is something about us being intentional about looking at Jesus again and looking at who he was and how he lived and who he is and all of that. I think I think there is, I guess I would say to this generation again, and when I say generation, I don't mean necessarily young people, I just mean whoever's around and still breathing. What are we going to do about race? What are we going to do? What will we do about the history that is being uncovered in Canada? What will we do about the history that is still being uncovered in the US? What as Christians is our response? What is our response to the opportunities and the challenges of our day? What is our response to the sins of the past? Who are we listening to? How are we responding? Because and one of the things I often hear in the area when people talk about race is it's heartbreaking. I'm like, great, so your heart's broken. Now what? That is not a complete response. That is a help. That's a feeling, and it's genuine. It's just not an end in itself. And so if we are going to rebuild an equitable society, what does that mean about how we relate with, communicate with, listen to the voices who aren't always represented? Who is the least represented in your societies? And what does that mean in action, in practice? And that will mean sacrifice. That will mean sacrifice. That will mean serving. That will mean stepping out of the way. It will mean those things. Are we prepared for that? Or do we need to still be, I mean, what do we still need to be known and seen? Do you know what I mean? All of that stuff. I think we'll have to, I think I would ask, but you know, every generation has to think how we respond to the challenges of our day. We know that the question of racism, it's not really a question, the reality of racism has come to the surface in recent years. For those of us who are on the receiving end, we would say it's always been there. We've always encountered it. It's just that more people are hearing now. How will we respond as church? How will we respond as neighbors? How will we respond as employers? How will we respond when your kid comes home dating someone of another ethnicity? Tell me how you feel then. Do you know what I mean? I mean, honestly, because from my life experience, I will tell you, it's not always the same. You can be singing in church and then your kid comes home with someone of a different ethnicity and you feel a whole different thing. Don't tell me about your racism singing a song. Tell me about it when it costs you, or it unleashes the unexpected in some way. What do we how will we respond to the realities of the Me Too movement? What would Jesus do about that? What would Jesus do? You know, we wore the bracelets and all that. What would Jesus do about racism? Would he say, don't be divisive? Would he say, let's move on? Do you mean, what would he? And I think we have to reckon with the discomfort of that, and of consumerism and all the, you know, the environment, all of these things. I guess when I was a kid, one of my seminal moments was reading about John Wesley writing to William Wilberforce at the end of his life and saying, basically saying, get rid of slavery. Like on his deathbed, his thing is, this is one of Satan's greatest evils. Fight against it, and hell will come against you. Fight against it. And I thought his faith had an implication on society. His faith aggressively, intentionally, even though some of his peers were enslaving people, his faith said, no, this is what, and it impacts society. And Wilberforce and many, many others involved. And I guess I keep on asking, if we believe, and since we believe, the gospel changes everything. And since we didn't receive the gospel by happenstance. Someone told us something. We witnessed something. We observed something. And not just the message of the gospel, but it fleshed out. It fleshed out in somebody's life and in the way they treated people and all of that kind of stuff. If we believe the gospel really is a change agent for society, what does that mean in how we function in society? Yeah. I think we have to grapple with that and the discomfort of that, and taking it beyond our personal, individualized relationship with Jesus and into a broken, hurting world. Because that's what it looks like the early church did.
Yeah. That's a powerful place to wrap up our conversation together, Joe. And you've been so generous to share, not only from your personal experience, but your wisdom, your insights. And yeah, I love that you're doing what you're doing, because clearly it's right in the wheelhouse of the giftings God's placed in your life and how he wants you to make a difference in the world. So we would love for people to be able to go beyond just listening to this conversation, to engage with you, any of your online platforms, your written resources, and so on. So where can people learn more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I would suggest 2 spaces. You can go to on the social medias if you are someone who is that way inclined. At Joe Saxton is the Instagram and Twitter and all that jazz. But if you go to my website, joesaxton.com, you will find out about the books I've written. You will find out about some leadership coaching opportunities I do with women leaders, whether they're in ministry or whether their ministry is a workplace or wherever. Some leadership intensives I do with women leaders, called the Aza Collective, and you're invited to engage with all of that. So head to the website and it will link you up to all the things. Awesome.
Well, Joe, on behalf of everybody tuning in, but also just from my own heart to yours, thanks so much for taking the time to be here today. Really are grateful.
Thank you. Thank you. It was fun. Lots of fun.